Cybersecurity, the challenges facing FAAs, featuring Daniel Commons, FSA Chief Information Security Officer.
As you've heard a dozen times or so far, again, welcome to the FSA conference. We appreciate you being here and supporting us, and I'm going to take the opportunity over the next 40 minutes, give or take, to talk to you a little bit about some of the challenges you're faced, specifically in how we're protecting and managing the data and information that we receive from the students, from FSA, to make sure that we don't have cybersecurity and cybersecurity issues as we go through our typical day-to-day business activities. So again, appreciate you being here. Sit back. There is a Q&A session for this as well. If you're in the first session, we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. If you still have questions, at the end of the slide deck, there is a address. Just go ahead and send your questions there. The campus cybersecurity team that works under me, we'll talk a little bit about their role. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So here's some of the items we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you an overview of cybersecurity. We're going to talk about some of the problems that you're faced with. Give you a little bit of guidance. Guidance is something we all have to live by. That's the compliance activities, part of the job. And then talk in general about cyber hygiene and the things that we can do to support good cyber practices to keep everything secure. So in the overview section, we're going to just dive right into talking about things like, on this slide, why are we here? Why are we all sitting here? Why am I taking the time out during the conference to talk to you? It's because the information and the activities that we have is critical for us to get our job done. If we don't have privacy data and financial data, we're unable to assist the students in obtaining their educational goals. So it's very important that we have the information, we can do our business, but at the same time, we need to protect the interests of the students and the interests of ourselves as we are good stewards of that information that they provided us. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that we face every day. We're going to look at the threats, and there are quite a few in the educational environment. We're going to talk about our roles, my role, your role in the cybersecurity, and then we'll talk again about some of the cybersecurity compliance requirements. So as we go to the headlines, and we've seen a lot of them over this last year, everything from the SolarWinds incident last December that had a major impact across not only the federal government, but all of the commercial environments, a lot of schools as well, where we thought we had good cybersecurity tools doing good jobs for us. We found issues with them. Required us to do a lot of response activity. We see cybersecurity attacks going after all the school districts. You got Texas. We've got a university paying $457,000 in ransomware to get the keys back to look at their data and look at their systems, unlock their systems, but might not have protected the data. That data might have been taken from the malicious actor and used in other ways and forms, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the briefing deck here. We saw the major pipeline attack. Major issues up and down the East Coast. We saw Equinox data center hit. We saw other schools with ransomware. We saw quite a few of it. T-Mobile breaches. All of these impact our ability to do our job. Either the attacks are focused at us, institutions of higher education, K through 12 as well, but focused at us and impacting our job and our ability to do it. And as we went through the COVID-19 response over the last 18 months or so, where we've gone from a full-time, virtually full-time, a lot of schools had virtual, but a full-time environment with students in classrooms to a virtual environment where most of our students were sitting at home or somewhere else, and we provided educational opportunities for them. We saw initially during COVID as we went to new media representation and presentation environment, the Zoom bombing where people would come in, disturb meetings and briefings that you were giving, classes that were going on, and we had to fight off those activities. So that's just an example of things we were faced with that were a direct result of a major shift in how we delivered educational content from that traditional brick and mortar to a more virtual environment. As we shift back to attendance in class, students now on the campus again, We still are going to, I believe, see a hybrid type environment where we will still have virtual opportunities. We will still have some brick and mortar activities. But I think as we advance education, as we look across the next few years, we're going to see combinations of those become the norm instead of the exceptions. So let's talk about cybersecurity in general and give you a quick overview. Hackers, the old term that we've had, those are malicious actors. There are people intending to do some kind of activity that they should not be doing. And typically refer to those things as like unauthorized activities. They're going to exploit any weaknesses we have. They're going to go after information. They're going to go after dollars if they can get dollars directly, or they're going to blackmail us, basically. A ransomware type event. We had over 150,000 vulnerabilities that were disclosed over the last year. Patching is a mitigation to that, and we see that as a major problem where we are not keeping our information systems current. Expectation is your IT department is doing that for you. But as we have looked at a lot of the incidents that have been reported to us, as well as the incidents we're seeing across the federal space as well, patching remains a concern that it just isn't properly being done and in a timely manner. SolarWinds, again, was a good example of that. A Microsoft event that happened a little bit in early spring was also another example where patching was critical to make sure it was done. In 2020, we also saw an increase in the frequency of cyber attacks with higher ransom payments. We're seeing that growth by about 300%. That's fairly significant. And again, North America, our region primarily, continues to be a large target as a geographic entity in general for cyber attacks. And then specifically for education, education has always been up somewhere in the higher areas of sectors that are ripe for targeting and have been consistently gone after as we have looked over the last few years. So some of the specific education breaches that we've looked at over the last year that have been reported to us directly, we have discovered through our media research and monitoring, or we have, and we'll talk about active activities we do, like a hunt team, whose job is to go out and look on the internet to see where they see compromises happen and where they're seeing those malicious actors advertising they've done something, and specifically where they actually have and offering up credentials, usernames and passwords associated with education, EDU events, universities, email addresses, etc. So we look at that consistently. Again, the K through 12 incidents, just as an example, there were over 408 publicly disclosed incidents, up 18%. 57% of all attacks were targeted at K through 12, big sector. The rest of them were going after institutions of higher education. With 1,700 schools, colleges, and universities were impacted by ransomware alone in the last year in one form or another. It may have been a minor inconvenience. It may have been as significant as several schools were totally shut down, right down to their phones on their desk, because those are part of their network as well. And they had to revert to using cell phones to conduct school business until they were able to restore their network and all their devices. The average cost of ransomware in higher education is running around $447,000. And in the Ponemon study, the cost of data breach in the education sector was $3.9 million in 2020. Divide that by the number of schools that are in that sector, you can see the average cost is fairly significant. So what are we doing about this? Well, the department has two major priority and focus areas that we're concentrating on. Both of them are focused on cyber areas. The first one is improve the student privacy data and cybersecurity controls of higher education. We're doing that through outreach. We're doing that through communications. We're trying to focus you on best practices and educating your population, educating your administrators your IT departments, your teachers, professors on how to do and protect the information, how to do good cybersecurity. Part of that is our outreach campaigns that we do with individual schools. When they ask questions to us, we give them back best practices. We also have several electronic announcements that have been put out over the last year. We have several more queued up. Uh, we provide some references to everybody. One of the electronic announcements had some references to some Homeland Security offered educational opportunities, both class opportunities, as well as things like infographics and flyers that you can distribute among your population at no cost to your schools. So we highly encourage you to take advantage of those type of opportunities. We're letting the word out to let people know that they are there. We also are producing some flyers for your use. Again, we encourage them to be used and distributed as you see fit. The second area that we're focused on is strengthening overall data protection and cybersecurity safeguards. Part of that is on how we conduct business. For example, within federal student aid, we are in the process of implementing multi-factor authentication for all applications. You will see changes in the future next 6 to 8 months on how you sign into some of our websites, how you sign into some of the information systems that you use in your everyday business. We're going to add additional security requirements. I think of it and compare it to my Ring doorbell now requires me to use multi-factor authentication to view my results and view my videos. That extra factor then protects that and protects my privacy more. We're doing the same thing across our information systems. So you'll see that be coming out right now. DCC, Digital Customer Communication System, is targeted for the June timeframe to fully implement multi-factor authentication. All the other systems are in different paths and different timelines, but the end goal is by about a year from now to be multi-factor authentication across the entire FSA infrastructure. That's going to help us protect the data. That's going to help us verify that you are, in fact, you when you sign in. And the reason that's so important is we're seeing increases in fraud activities. And a lot of that fraud activity is being done by compromised credentials. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if your username and password is available on the internet, and people will gather to that and use it to attempt to sign into a multitude of information systems, not just federal student aid, but they'll try banks, they'll try anywhere they can that they may think that those credentials work. And if in fact they do work, then they've compromised your account at that particular business location. So let's address the problem a little bit more. The one thing that we never ever want to see as we're sitting at our desktop is something like this, the oops. We messed up. Someone somewhere in the organization took an inappropriate action, more than likely was unintentional. They opened up an email that contained a malicious link, be it the flavor of the day, be it the TikTok you want to look at, the YouTube you want to share. But that link, they clicked on it, and part of that going to that site then downloaded malicious code on your computer. The code is designed to lock up your computer and every other computer can reach. That can be extremely detrimental depending on how your particular institution handles their IT environment. We have again seen schools that are very well prepared and very mature in their cybersecurity space receive ransomware, still got through. However, the impact was, these 4 or 5 people in this one office were the only ones impacted. The rest of the school was not. Therefore, they contained it. They also had very good backup processes so that they were able to recover, and the total loss was less than a day worth of data, which is significant. However, not as significant as losing literally a decade or more of data in some cases. So it's very important that we pay attention to things like where we go on websites and what email we're looking at. If it looks suspicious, follow your particular administration's directions on what they want you to do to report it and or ideally not open it. But again, there are processes out there. A lot of schools are implementing technology to help you identify what we're referring to as typically phishing type phishing messages that you can very easily go hit just a little button on your Outlook or whatever tool you use for email and report it to your IT so they can respond to it, as well as put it into your junk email or somewhere where you become a little more protected than sitting in your main inbox. So take advantage of those opportunities. We have a saying within FSA in the department: I'd rather report it than get in trouble for it. So ideally, you're reporting things. Ideally, this isn't happening. But if this does happen, it's critical that your institution has processes in place to try to recover, and ideally, processes in place to prevent it before it does happen. Again, you may have seen this. I hope you weren't one of the schools that did see it, and you probably have a lot more to say from your perspective if, in fact, you were one of the schools. So we go from the ransomware type events that we just talked about, the UIPs, to what is the real threat landscape that we're looking at? And this is an area that we spent a lot of time on within FSA trying to analyze to understand better what the threats are specific to the education sector. We also have worked with Homeland Security, the CISA office specifically, to understand what they're seeing as well as threats to this particular sector. Some of the highlighted things that we see, and probably the biggest one up at the top right-hand side, is that ransomware. We see the target of distance learning, i.e. the COVID environment we've been in. We see a lot of targets to mobile devices happening. As you know, students and many of your constituents, that cell phone in their hand is their lifeblood. They have everything on it. They have their banking information, they have their school information, they have their personal information. That becomes a treasure trove if someone wants to go after that device and that information to enable them then to get other things and do other things to you in a malicious manner. So mobile is a big target. How we secure our mobile sites, those sites accessible and specifically designed for mobile access. FSA has offered that service as one of our new initiatives under the DCC 2 years ago. We continue to expand that. We continue to secure it better every year, applying different approaches, different technologies behind the scenes to make sure that the students are not getting infected from that, from us, not impacted from us. At the same time, that if their device is compromised, it won't compromise, the FSA interface and won't compromise any other FSA customers that sit behind that interface. So we'll continue to evolve that as mobile is a high priority for us, and make that more robust. Same time, I know a lot of other folks, a lot of other people in the industry are also working on making those mobile devices much more robust, and we've seen several initiatives from the manufacturers themselves and folks like Apple and Google that work on trying to make their mobile platforms more secure. We also see phishing. Phishing typically how we see ransomware. Hacking still out there. Data breaches in general. One thing that we have seen trend-wise on the positive is with COVID-19, we're not seeing paper-based breaches happen, where you inadvertently give a piece of paper to someone that you shouldn't have, that had a second student's information on it. That's gone to virtually nothing because, again, we're not working in a paper environment. And we really haven't seen a dramatic increase in the electronic side either, because we already were starting to get a handle on that. You were doing a very good job of starting to manage and protect, encrypt, for example, that student data as you sent it around between your offices, as you managed it within your office from an electronic perspective. So we've seen a balance there, and I think that's all the lessons we've learned over the years. I encourage you to continue with those lessons, and hopefully this threat landscape will become less and less of an impact to us as we go forward. So some specific threats, and a few of these I have alluded to. We've saw over the last couple of years where compromised credentials were used to go into student accounts and change their bank routing information. For example, they had their primary bank. There may have also been within their profile the opportunity to put a secondary bank. So the attackers have come in, put in that secondary accounting codes for their bank, waited a period of time, and then they flipped them so that their accounting codes now become the primary distribution point. A lot of times we didn't discover that, or wasn't discovered until a student come forward and says, "I'm not getting my money in the bank," and then we start tracing that back and figure out exactly what happened. And so that's something we have to keep on my eye on and listen to what the students say about this and make sure we do the appropriate research to validate what's happening. And if we see it happening, is it a trend across our environment, your environment, and then report it so we can share that information and share that type of an attack with everybody to help everybody get better. PII for resale and black market. And I will say that while the target here is student PII, what we are seeing a lot of is PII in general that has been compromised by other breaches. We've seen Target, Facebook, you name the social media site that have all had compromises of credentials. And one trend that we see fairly consistently is that individuals are using the same username and same password combination for multiple sites. So if my Facebook account gets compromised, I might be using that same username and password for my FAFSA application or for my logging into the school as well. So if it's compromised in one place, the whoever wants to use that credentials can use those credentials to go to a lot of different places. And that's something we have to keep our eye on. And again, infographics, training, information sharing, get the word out there to not have the same username and password combination at all your sites because it is extremely dangerous and will result in compromises. And we've seen some of that over the summer where fraud happened because credentials were compromised and those credentials were used then to access accounts and then change those accounts or attempt to change those accounts per student basis. So I got to keep that in mind, make those recommendations to everybody. And then personally, if you have similar things that you're doing, and a lot of people do that because it's easy, keep that in mind that we recommend you do that. Now, multi-factor authentication will help us as we go forward because not only do I have to have a username and password, but I have to have that third item, that multi-factor that typically is not electronically available. It may be maybe a device that you have. It may be a card. You know, all the government employees are issued a PIV card. That's our personal identification. That also has our certificates that says that yes, it is me, and I'm authorized to do certain activities. Again, we're looking at that multi-factor. There'll be different types of multi-factor depend on what you are trying to do. For example, if you are accessing the FSA systems as an administrator, you may have one set of credentials, maybe a token of some type that we send to you. It might be an electronic software certificate, but you'll have one set of credentials for that have a different stringent set of requirements around it than a student where we may have some kind of authenticator, much like I referred to the Ring doorbell. They use a authenticator that's a one-time password approach to enable the student to access their account. So we're trying to balance it based on the impact to everybody and the protection of the data based on the amount of data the individual can get to and the particular sensitivity. I talked about ransomware and encrypting the school systems. That's an issue we have to deal with. It's going to happen. And one thing we haven't talked about in this space, because we've always concentrated on primarily Title IV information, that's the PII and financial information. But at the same time, we're getting more and more reports on university research and intellectual property being targeted. Some of that is under federal grants. They not necessarily Department of Education grants either, but they're under grants from other organizations. And sometimes the school doesn't know who to report it to. We've seen several of those reports come to us, and we go, okay, let's find out who the real sponsor is, get the information to them and that other federal agency. So not only are we targeted, but a lot of other folks in your university and school are targeted as well. Here's some additional ones. Ransomware, we're going to pound that in until you know what ransomware impact will be to you. Credential theft, the username and password attacks to compromise staff and student banking information. Again, they're going after the dollars. Some of that is organized activities from groups, and some of it is very unorganized, maybe individuals or much smaller groups, not specifically targeting it for fraud or theft activities. As we migrate our networks into cloud environments, we're seeing a lot more clouds being stood up by schools, with little to no security around them. And so we want to stress to everybody that if you are, as part of your network design, as your IT team, if you are using cloud services, make sure you get with your cloud service provider to get the maximum security you can around that, and especially if it contains that sensitive data that we've been talking about throughout this briefing. So specifically to ransomware, it's the what here. Schools reported the attackers are targeting institutions. I've given you a couple examples already. They've been very successful when they have been. Again, we saw several schools totally taken down, right down to their phones, unable to perform any business for a period of time. We've seen schools in a position where the whole school is not down. However, their financial systems may be down because that was kind of where the target ended up at. And then in other places, we've seen split, and then we've seen schools that have been attacked with ransomware and have had little to no impact because of the maturity of their programs. So we'll continue to look at those, and again, we'll provide best practices if you have questions, trying to get the impact to ransomware down. Also, if you need connection to outside organizations such as FBI, our OIG office, etc., we're more than happy to facilitate that for you to get them to assist you in recovering and understanding what happened to your environment. Phishing is typically the way that they get in there to do it, and again, that propagates across your entire network. So why is it really important to us? The ransomware is out there. You're the targets, and you look like an easy target to those folks that are sending things out. We've seen everyone from very small institutions, technical schools, some of the community colleges, major universities. We've seen it in the health side of the major universities, where medical centers associated with the university have been taken down as well. So you're easy targets. You have a lot of data. You usually have very small IT staffs. Most of the chief information security officers or their equivalents I've talked to over the last 4 years consistently say very limited budgets, very limited on their expertise in cyber, and then oftentimes their IT staff as a whole is extremely small and can barely keep up with making sure the computers are turned on and working properly, yet alone the back end stuff necessary to properly secure them. So that's a risk. That's something we have to think about, and your school has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. A lot of times, your network most cases, was designed to be very open. Universities, education is a very open environment. However, there is information you should not be sharing with every student, and so we're stressing that for that data that you need to protect, and there'll be different layers of protection for different types of data, but design your network so that you're protecting the data at the appropriate level and making sure that is not distributed to those folks that do not have a need to have that data. They're basically unauthorized to access that data, term we often use when we're dealing with talking to you administrators is the fact that whether they're authorized or unauthorized. So keep that in mind, that your network design is going to help solve your problem or will actually exasperate your problem, depending on your network designs. You have a lot of money. At least most people think you have a lot of money. I'm sure you don't think you have enough money. But you are, again, a target for, as a financial institution, basically. You have, if nothing else, the student loan information and data, their dollars. Again, I gave the example of changing bank routing to gain profit. So you're a very lucrative target there. Huge repositories of personal information. Some schools I've talked with that have had issues, in some cases, have 20 to 30 years worth of data readily accessible that, in fact, in one ransomware event was all locked down. They had to revert back to backups. Thankfully, they had backups for that information. Otherwise, it would have been lost forever unless they were able to recover it by paying a ransom, not something that we're going to endorse by any means. And then everyone said, oh, COVID-19, you all going remote. There's a lot of vulnerabilities in remote operations, remote activities. Started with Zoom bombing. We saw that right away as soon as we started using that tool. And then as the tool responded to it and the commercial products became better and more robust, became more resistant to those activities, they just switched their view to how else are you doing remote activities. So COVID-19 was a driver to spike us a little bit on events like ransomware, because now the computers are not secondary to the job of dealing with the student. Now they are the way you deal with the student. And in some cases, that's the only way you deal with the student. You may not see that student, and the potential is you may never have seen that student, and they could have been at your university for several years now. We all are stuck with guidance. Guidance being compliance activities. Federal government side, I have more compliance than I would ever want to imagine. We just saw a new major shift in cybersecurity guidance coming out with presidential executive order in May of last year, which laid out a whole new paradigm for the federal government on how we're going to do cybersecurity as we go forward, with a lot of technical implementations that we have to do over the next few years. Multi-factor authentication being one of those, as an example, that will be impacting you at the schools in some way. It may be minimal impact, which is our target. In some cases, it just may mean you need to change your business process a little bit. In other ways, it's going to introduce a whole new method, and you're going to have to learn that new method as part of continuing business. But again, guidance is what drives a lot of what we do. We see some of the things we're going to talk about here a little bit is data breaches. Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, you all receive an audit every year on GLBA, so it's something near and dear to your hearts, your audit findings. We are going to focus only on cybersecurity audit findings, not the whole audit. So we want to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to briefly just mention National Institute of Standards and Technology's Special Pub 80171, which is all about protecting controlled unclassified information, that's privacy data and financial data, in non-federal systems and organizations. You'll see another briefing on your agenda by Jason Gray, who is the department CIO. Jason's going to spend his half hour or so with you to talk specifically about NIST 800-171 and the impact of NIST 800-171. Right now, we are still looking at it from the Department of Education perspective on what the future looks like and what the roadmap may be. There have been no decisions on direction or guidance yet. Once that is determined on what the direction forward is going to be, we will definitely have communications out to everybody. We will put an implementation plan in place if there's any changes. And the idea is to make any transition we have, as smooth as possible across the entire population, particularly down to you, the end users in most cases. I'll just briefly talk about that. Again, go to Jason's briefing for more information. So what is a breach? For the last 3 years, we've been using the OMB definition, which is the federal standard that we're held to. So if I have any kind of loss of control, compromised, unauthorized exposure, talked about authorized versus unauthorized acquisition, or similar occurrence where someone other than the authorized user gets to that personal information, or an authorized user accesses that data and uses it for other than an authorized purpose. So let me give you a couple of examples here before we go much further. If you say an individual has a side business that is selling or getting information to students on particular loan repayment options they may have, or something they've generated for a need, or it may even be that they're running some kind of information board that they're providing information and they want to increase their mailing list. And they go in there and pull out a list of individuals from the data provided by and under Title IV. They're in violation. That is a breach. You're not allowed to use that data for anything but the purpose it was gathered for, which is to support the students' financial efforts at your institution. So you definitely don't want to do that. Then the other way is if you talked about the paper incident earlier. We saw a lot of those in the past where you had a whole stack of paper on your desk. A student came forward, may have had 3 or 4 standing in front of you. They're all asking for it, and you grab one, hand it to the student, and realize the student looks at it and goes, "Oh, this isn't mine." Hands it back. That technically is a breach because they're not authorized any other student information. You're authorized by right of your position, but they're not authorized. So we saw a lot of those. Those have gone down, as I said. That's just another example of where an unauthorized person gets some information they should not have access to. One other one to keep in mind as you have interns working to support you, and they're a great workforce. I would love to have a lot of interns working for me, but we need to keep in mind that if they need access to the data, there is a process to go through to get approval to get access to the data. Don't just give them your username and password and have them log in, because if something happens, it's your username and your password that was used. Therefore, the assumption is it was you. And so you want to make sure that they're doing things right. We have provisions and ways to get them access to the data if that's part of their business process supporting you. So just keep that in mind. That was a problem we saw in the past. Haven't seen much of that recently. Thank you very much for that. It's through your efforts that protects us from those breaches and activities. So here's the process. We've stood up within federal student aid a campus cybersecurity component. You also hear it referred to as institutions higher education team. Kind of synonymous, same group of folks. Their job is to work breaches, GLBA audit findings for cybersecurity, communications with the schools on cybersecurity, and the interactions that we have in some of the back end protective activities, as well as working with a lot of the institutions that represent schools. We've worked with EDUCAUSE in the IT space, NACUBU, you name the acronym that you're used to. We've been trying to work with them over the last few years to get them on board to help us shape how cyber looks for schools, know and understand the impact of schools. We got a lot of very good feedback from the auditors as well, the GLBA auditors, on what they're doing, what they're seeing, how they do it, so we understand how they're making these findings. We were able to also provide them with some thoughts on what we were seeing as well as we actually worked with the schools. So that's kind of critical. But again, that goes on in the background. That team then would get your report, and we encourage you to report regardless. We'll work it. If it's not Title IV data, it's your event to work. It's not going to cause a ripple. It's not going to cause a negative impact to you. Any report is not going to be a negative. It's we're going to help you protect. We're going to help you recover. That's our job, is to help you. And I can't say that enough. This team is here solely to help you. They're not carrying a hammer. There are other folks within FSA that have the hammer associated with the data. We do work with those folks, but our first step is if you report it and you're working it, we understand it. We're going to make sure everyone's aware of it, but we're going to help you get to a good state at the end. And that's our goal. Again, that's that collaboration we're talking about. We'll give you recommendations. We are gathering lessons learned and we're looking at trends. And we're trying to measure the areas that are going up so we can figure out if we need additional communications, additional training. Should we focus on that? Are we getting the right data sets to understand? So trying to do the analysis work to help you get better and help you identify threats and potential solutions to address those threats. So how do you report the breach? Send us an email to this address. Call the Department's Security Operations Center. That phone number is manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are very happy to call their FSA counterparts and get them out of bed because FSA doesn't run a 24/7 SOC. We are basically a Monday through Friday operation supported by the department. But they're more than happy to get my incident response people out of bed, and they're happily do that to be able to help you at that time of need. So don't hesitate to call. We'll get somebody. Give us some certain information we're asking you for here. what's going on, what are you doing about it. And I'm fine with you calling in and saying, I got a breach going on. This just happened recently. School called and says, I'm in the middle of the breach. I'm fighting the fire. I'll get back to you. I'm good. Okay, now we're getting everything up in the back end to help them once they come back to us and say, here's what really happened, etc. But the first notice was, I've got this event going on. I'm in the middle of the fire. I'm fighting it. We're fine with that. We're going to stand by to help you when you tell us and are ready to help. We don't want to interfere with your ability to do your triage. Definitely don't want to interfere with that. You've got to do your jobs. Your IT teams have to do their jobs. So again, we're here to help you as you advance through that, to give you some pointers, and if we need to, give you some assistance from some other federal agencies that may be able to help. So let's go ahead and switch over a little bit to talk about the actual compliance stuff. So we talked about the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act a little bit. Again, it's been around since 1999. We had some additional supplement information in 2019, added some additional audit requirements. You live with it every year. It happens to you. You get findings associated with it. Hopefully not, but you may. And you want to be able to respond to them. What we look at specifically are some general requirements that are specific to cyber. These are the three main requirements out of GLBA. You need an information security program written down. Now that can be in one volume, one book, one checklist, or it can be in 5 or 6. It's important to provide to your auditors the entire set of documentation. We've seen some audit findings, and when we start working with the schools on the audit findings, oh, we gave them this, but we also have that information in 2 other documents that we didn't give them. That's why they got the finding. So when we're able to properly explain to the audit community that here is a full complement, it's in 3 particular documents. We don't say you have to have one, you just say it has to be written down. It's part of your program. And we've reviewed it and we're good with it. We can close that action and we will clear it off the books with you. So make sure that whatever you have written down is what you provide. If you need examples of templates, the team can help you with that. Most schools have some kind of program written down. That's not been a large audit findings. A few have audit findings for that, but not a lot. So put that together. You need to have a POC, and it's really important for a number of reasons. First of all, that is the person we would go to if we find something with your school. For example, if our hunt team finds your school information compromised on the internet somewhere, they need someone to call and say, hey, here's what we found. Are you aware of this? In a couple of instances this last year, we found stuff before the school was aware of it. We made a notification because we had a good POC number. We notified them, and they immediately took actions to stop the activity that was ongoing and be able then to recover after that. So we're monitoring. I won't say trolling, but we're looking on the internet and the dark web for anything we can find. When we find it, we ask the school, is this an issue for you? Here's what we found. And by the way, it may be a list of accounts you might want to have the students or the administrators change their passwords. And that's happened a number of times as well. And then finally, actually go out and assess your risks. You want to know where you're vulnerable at, and you want to know what gaps you have that you may need to address with your institution to ask for more resources to be able to properly protect that information. So the audit process, when an audit finding comes into us, it comes into an entity here in our program office in FSA. They then take the cybersecurity component, send it down to our team, and say, go work it. And we do. So what we do is we open up a case on it so we can track it, strictly a tracker. Then we get a hold of the schools and say, and you'll get a memo. I will tell you, under COVID-19, we were on hold from taking any actions for over a year. That hold was lifted in the May timeframe. We sent out somewhere around 250 notifications to school. It's basically a letter saying you've been identified with these findings within your GLBA audit. We're here to help. Please contact us. We'll work with you. Again, cooperation, help, work with you, not hammer you, work with you. So anyway, we sent out those out. We got a lot of fantastic responses back. These go to senior people, signed out by the FSA's Chief Information Security Officer. Time of this finding happens to be me. But we send those out to let the school know that we're ready, we're willing to help you, we want to get you corrected so you don't have that audit finding in your next audit cycle. So we view them, we score them just so we can track them if it seems like a high, medium, low basically type approach, just for prioritization within our team. We do the contact letter. We send out, again, work with your end of the teams to come to conclusions. Of those 250 or so that we sent out letters for back in May, we had 101 of them are closed already in roughly a 120-day period. Lots of great effort from schools. In some cases, schools already closed it. Just became a here's your evidence and we're good to go. So we want to make sure those get closed, and we'll work hard with you to get them closed to prevent it from happening again in the future. So some of the guidance that's out there, we talked about putting your program together. The whole goal of the reason for the cybersecurity elements are there is make sure you have security and confidentiality of that customer information, protect you against unauthorized or anticipated threats or hazards, and the unauthorized access to that information that could cause some harm or inconvenience to our customers. That was the whole guidance behind the GLBA. You saw the activities that we do as we move forward. Some additional guidance on this slide is there are 5 main elements we look for when we look at an information security program. You got the contact, you've got the risk assessment done, you've created some kind of safeguards, approach, mitigation, plans to put technical solutions in place, plans to change business processes. That can also be a way to address the findings. You're looking at your service provider. So if you, for example, have a third party that does the business for you, you need to make sure that they're doing the right things so that your audit findings are either corrected and or you don't receive audit findings to start with. And the most important thing is continually look at your program. It's in the cyber world, if we're not changing things for the better, we're failing. And we can fail very quickly. The volume of attacks happening, the change in the technology that we deal with happens at light speed, literally light speed. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to keep up with what's going on. We're trying to keep up with what the attackers are doing to us and looking at. And ideally, by doing certain safeguard items like good patching, good configuration management of your technology, your devices, your computers on your desk, those type of proactive things, hopefully preventing us to get into a compromised situation in the future. Some of the other audit concerns that we've experienced over the last 18 months, roughly 5 to 10% of the schools didn't even know the GLBA requirements. So again, education is what we're trying to do, get schools to know. This is an example of educating. There are requirements in GLBA for cyber. Let's address them. 3 main areas the findings were: didn't have a point of contact. Get an senior IT person, get whoever's appropriate in your structure of your school to be that person, that point of contact that we can go to, that knows what's going on. They're also responsible for making sure that plan is in place and that plan is also assessed. And then the risk assessment being one of the largest ones that just doesn't happen. They may have a point of contact, they may have a plan, they've never exercised the plan to make sure it works, and they've never done any real look at what the risk is to their environment based on their design, based on the data they're holding, based on their business processes. Going into some more examples, we talked about the first 2. The third one, use of accounts that are not password protected. We still see that happening. Everything should have some kind of credential against it. At a minimum, username and password. So make sure you put passwords on it. If it's your IT team using default credentials, a lot of times that says admin for the username, admin for the password. they're using default credentials, they're primed for compromise. So we want to make sure that they're changing those. Don't share with staff members and interns. Talked about that earlier. If you have to scan PII data and you store it, make sure that it's properly protected. Your storage location is secured. Ideally, it's all encrypted so that even if you lose it, the encrypted data can't be used. And encryption is very important. Make sure you have some kind of program where you periodically look for malicious programs. Your IT department should be able to take different technologies in there to scan the environment, to look for vulnerabilities, to look for opportunities for attackers to take advantage of. So what are some of your corrective actions? We're here to help. That's the most important thing. I'll drop right down to the bottom of the slide. As a last resort, and I say the very last resort, if you are not working with us, if you're not reporting to us, if you're not making sure that you're doing the right things, and we continually try to reach out to you to get you to cooperate with us, the very last resort is some kind of activity that's identified inside of your program compliance documentation, the things that you sign, because you may be an undue risk to that data that we have provided to you. That's it, last resort. I will tell you, in 4 years, we have not used the last resort. We've got right up to the edge of it, but we've not actually had to go and last resort is pull your Title IV access totally. We have had times where we've had to cut off people from certain systems, compromise credentials they keep using, for example. But again, last resort, we're really here to help you. That's been my theme since I took over this office. That's the entire theme of this team. The lead of the team, Scott Tambert, was hired out of education. So he understands the education environment. He knows how to operate, and he is very helpful. And he wants his team to be helpful, and that's the way we've structured the team. So again, we're here to help you. We'll provide you whatever best practices we can to help you. We'll help you work through your corrective actions and make sure that we get to a good state in your GLB audit, ideally so you don't have any more audit findings as you build a good program and you maintain that program. I said I'd talk about NIST 800-171 for just a second. It is a federal requirement when we share data with non-federal agencies and departments, organizations, to protect the data. Privacy and financial data is considered controlled unclassified information. We are looking at how this might apply to schools. We did a large effort last year, meeting with a lot of outside organizations, doing a lot of brainstorming internal to the department. We are still in the process of looking at what our options are, looking at what may be the best recommendations as we go forward, understanding also the impact to schools for whatever decision or direction we decide to go. Just be aware it's out there. You're going to hear a lot of it over the next year, I'm sure. I'm already, this morning someone called me up and said, hey, we saw that schools have to go do the DoD approach for NIST 800-171 compliance. Well, that didn't come from us. We didn't say you had to do that. It might be one of the options we're looking at. Don't know yet. But we didn't have been given no direction yet that NIST 800-171, what the implication is to the schools. So just keep your ear out. We talked about this last year. We were hoping to have some final guidance out. That is still being worked. Again, we're looking at all the implications and ultimately the impact to you, the end user, the schools. Finally, and I'll go through these last few relatively quickly, talk about general hygiene. I've talked a lot about what you can and can't do, what you should do, activities that would make you better, proactive activities, scanning, patching, those type of things. It's very important to understand that not everyone is going to be at a level 5. That's the optimized, man. Everything is golden. Nothing can happen to you. You live in a totally disconnected world, because that's what would happen at a level 5. You would have your little island, but you would have no way to communicate outside your island because you were so well protected. we know you're not going to get there. We don't want you down at level 1 because there you're just barely protecting anything, if you are even protecting stuff. What we're shooting for is somewhere in the level 3, level 4 area. Level 3 being I got good basic practices in place. We're implementing them. We're fairly effective with them. We're managing them within our resource pot. And we are not getting GLBA findings. We're not getting breaches happen on a consistent basis. They're a one-off periodic. We have some kind of control when people come in and try to send us that malicious email. We have some kind of restriction to prevent people from going to malicious websites. So you've got that managed segment. That's good cyber hygiene. Step above that is I got a really robust program and I'm doing proactive things. And then that area, that sweet spot in that 3 to lower 4 area is where we want everyone to be. We're going to try to help you get there as much as we can with advice and what we can with the limitations of the fact that it's your networks and your operations. We're not going to force anything on you at this time, but we're going to try to help you reach that goal of being level 3 and level 4. And a lot of that is just through basic recommendations to you, suggestions on like network architecture design, lessons we have learned as an actual service provider, as running information systems. We've got 70 major information systems of federal student aid, all associated with delivering the experience to the students and to you. That's a lot of experience that we have, and we try to rope that in from all of our teams to create these best practices, to create answers to questions when you ask them. So take advantage of that, please. Again, our target is to get you up to level 3. Some of the best practice examples to get you there, have some kind of good policy above and beyond even what the minimum GLBA says you have kind of a structure. Even if you have holes and gaps, at least you've identified the holes and gaps. So some kind of, cybersecurity policy. I always use a risk-based approach, and there are trade-offs based. So you can, like the island, I can make myself so secure I can't communicate with anybody, but I also can't get my job done. So there's trade-offs between business requirements and protecting the information from a technology perspective. So work within your organization to figure out what your risk acceptance is, or what your risk appetite is, understand what you have to protect, and then work towards that balance. Segregate your data, back it up. Multi-factor authentication, I talked about that's coming. Your passwords. Make sure you keep an eye on each other as privileged users. As privileged users, you have access to more data than a student would. A student has their own record. You may have your entire school's records. And in some cases, like I said, that goes back potentially decades into the history. So again, watch each other. Make sure you're doing the right things. If someone's accessing information at after hours, is there a real reason for it? A little bit harder with the COVID environment because people are often working shifting hours just to let life happen around them. But again, keep an eye on what's going on with each other. Training, knowledge sharing, raise your awareness, monitor your third parties, and always use the principle of least privilege. If they don't need access to it, don't give access to it. I'd kind of like to wrap it up on this last slide here. Here's some communications we have put out. Always look out there for electronic announcements. As the new Partner Connect environment continues to get more robust, you're going to see more and more cybersecurity information posted out there. Again, making it more accessible to you. Take advantage of that. We also have some federal resources here. I would recommend you take and hand this over to your IT teams and say, hey, here's some references you can go and look at. Some excellent materials from CISA, the Homeland Security folks, NIST. You also will see the CMMC program is a DoD program, but it talks about NIST 800-171 quite a bit, which is their baseline. And the National Cybersecurity Alliance also offers a lot of very good information that you can provide to not only your administrators and your staff at your school, but also your students. So keep this in mind. I'd share this. I would recommend you go out and just take a little look to see what's available. Always watch IFAP. We're going to put things out there, electronic announcements, to get more and more information out to you as we go forward. And finally, I'd like to thank you for attending. The virtual experience last year was extremely well received. We got some of the largest audiences FSA has ever seen at the conference, thanks to the virtual environment. This year, I expect the numbers to be even higher. And again, I thank you for taking time out of your agenda to spend with me to talk about cybersecurity, and some of the compliance activities. Again, any questions you have, send them to the FSA School Cyber Safety at ed.gov. That team will respond back to you and try to answer your questions and or do some research to make sure we get you a good answer. So again, thank you very much and have a good rest of your conference.